I mean, if we try to play it actually and try to perceive it as an instrument, there what you can have. So our cube is a module unit, and the last time around we've been talking about the harp module, which is in here, remember? If you have no idea what is it all about, just check the previous episodes. I'm talking about those in details, and today I'm gonna tell you about a new module that I prepared, and that is a spring set. It is fairly simple because it just made out of 4 of those bars, which are about 4 and 3 centimeters wide, all about 30 centimeters long. And the trick here is that we have a set of springs that you can control in terms of a tension. This cut here and here allows you to control the tension and thus control how the springs behave, and that behaves nicely as an analog spring reverb unit. And let's just hear actually how it sounds on its own. I'm gonna place it here, I'm gonna put on headphones, I'm gonna take the contact mic we have in here, attach it just to the body, to the frame. So this is the sound of the unit on its own. As you can hear, it has a pretty big, long, dark tail that is brought to us by the set of springs. I'm not using a big spring, I'm using a fairly small springs. They're about 12 centimeters long, and it took me a while to figure out what kind of a tension you need for a spring to make it resonate properly as a reverb. And I figured that something about 10 to 20% from a nominal length is a good beginning, is a good starting point. So in case if my spring is about 12 centimeters long or 10 centimeters long, I would need to add 10% to that, so 1.2 or 1 centimeter as a starting point, and then I can pull it a little bit more to change the tone, because the way it changes when you expand it even more, it become shorter and it become brighter. So the set of springs with the medium tension actually gives you a fairly low organic tail, and it works just nicely because it captures every contact to the frame and just extend it, just give it a good lush sound. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna drop it on a cube, we're gonna test it with some sounds, we're gonna record some sounds, and actually I'm considering of making a virtual instrument out of that. So I would say stay tuned, it's gonna be fun, and buckle up, let's go. There you go. That's it. As I was saying, 4 bolts, 4 nuts, and we have the unit placed and mounted, and everything is working. Should work nicely. So this particular build that I'm having here, it has been inspired by cajons, and I like those cajons that you can, or semi-acoustic drum kits, you know, when you have a cajon on the bottom with the kick pedal and everything, and then you have a minor cajon in front, and there's sometimes some springs someplace that you can just imitate the more of a high-end elements like hi-hats and so on and so on. So what in here I like to have is pretty much the same. I placed units in a certain formation so we have a quick access to some parts. So here is the place that I can play all the more or less of a kick or low end sounds that would sound like this. Probably would like to hear that as well. Weird sounding so far. Pretty low-endy. Don't fully get why, to be honest. Overall it works, and let's discuss some downsides. I wasn't precise enough with the fixed position of these bolts for drilling the holes, so it's not that perfectly mounting every time. So I don't know, I either redo the holes or redo these plates, or just see what can be done. Then if you're gonna build this kind of a setup yourself, I would highly recommend to calculate this distance between the hole and the side of the bar, so it would be reasonably easy to mount the springs. It was good that I gave it a bit of a measure before I actually drilled them. Then tuning, the whole process of tuning is slightly tricky sometimes as well. So what would you need to do is you would need to basically untie all the springs, like I do it that way, and now that it's open and it's tunable, having a long springs like that is good. It adds a bit of a coloration that I won't get from dual springs like in here. The dual springs, they have a certain feature that they're not very bright. They're fairly loose, as you can see, and it's a balance. It's a balance between having small units and making them to sound much longer than they are, and I figured that if I combine two springs instead of using one big one, I will get much lower sound, and it end up actually being like cheaper than buying bigger springs. So this is a nice trick. So use several smaller springs to emulate a bigger unit. Yeah, let's see it in action, okay? Now, before I move on, I would like to tell a few things about the build. So it was a fairly simple on one hand build, because I just need to cut off the steel plates. I made them two sides so they at least improve the sturdiness a little bit. As I was saying, finding up the position for the holes was a bit uncertain, so instead of just trying to figure out the perfect concept, I decided to build the first one and see the mistakes and then fix them if needed. But everything turned out fairly okay. Also, I figured that 2mm steel on these smaller plates actually start being fairly soft. Was on the edge of being bended by springs and everything. So yeah, I have to keep in mind that 3cm width is probably the edge for me of what I can use, the minimum width. It's good to know for the future details. And that's it for the building. That's it. Otherwise, I have to tell, I expected it to be much more complicated, but this setup, the way I described it, with minor springs, with a good enough sturdiness and medium, I would say, tension to the spring, just gave such a sweet spot results for the sound. It's just tail. It's perfect. It's a perfect reverb unit, and I'm considering if I should make one more or one bigger one, because I've ordered more springs, and we'll see how it works. Then, speaking of the virtual instrument, for the virtual instrument I recorded those basic positions where I have head to the middle of the body as a kick, sort of a kick. It obviously triggers the whole chassis to work and triggers all the elements, so we hear some minor noises and textures and so on, and that is nicely executed in the sample, because it's just immediately burned in with all its perfections and imperfections, if I may say. Then what you can do when you record samples is to find a good spot, because hitting to the edge would give you one sound and hitting it absolutely in the center would give you another sound. So finding a good spot for the hit and then performing it consistently is a good starting point. Then with the left hand I have more of a percussive sounds. more of a snarey sounds, like mid-frequency orientated. I hit the side of the main chassis. I hit this bar hanging here. It transferred the signal to the plate, it transferred the signal to the spring, to this set of springs, and of course to the main set of springs we have in here. It all gets the information as well. Then hitting the plate gives you also different sounds. Springs are not that good for hitting because they don't have good enough like transient and texture in the transient, but they more about the tone, they more about the sustain. So they are needed but for different purpose. And then finding interesting elements to hit on, like bolts, nuts here, corners, anything you can find to hit would work. Then I used cutoffs from the springs just to have high-pitched sounds in variations. And then I obviously perform a little bit on the springs themselves, creating this mayhem, out of control type of sounds that I found a real nice application. But I'm gonna talk about that later when we will go through the instrument. And I think that's it. So when I figure the key positions that I want to perform, then I'd like to plug the microphone, get all the mics active, and then find the dynamic range that I can perform. So it means that I'm playing from the quietest sounds to the actually fairly loud ones, and then till I hit the cue properly. And of course, not to damage yourself, be careful about that. But finding a good dynamic range is nice for the instruments. So I ended up having 13 dynamic layers for one position of kick, and then about a 10 for the second position of the kick. Pretty much the same amount of hits and dynamic layers for several percussion, for several snare parts. And then for the rest of the metal stuff, it's actually not as dynamic because the sound doesn't change too much when you play quieter or louder. So I didn't bother, to be honest. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention is that I also made those kind of a sweeps, like whooshes, but with metal that would sound pretty much like strumming, with a bigger tail, with rattling and everything. So yeah, it's perfect. So quickly regarding the virtual instrument that I was talking about, here is the instrument itself. What would you need for that is a contact 6.8 or higher. The interface that you see is nothing but just an image with the mapping on colors that we also see on a MIDI keyboard in here in the bottom part of a contact, and that is following the same idea that I was describing in the video, that we have some layers of kick, snare, high end, so-called long tails, then this part that I was talking about, rubbing and creating the mayhem with the springs, and sweeps. Yeah, nice and easy. I will also attach the samples from the recording session so you can work with them on your own. And if we check in the mapping, it's quite interesting because that is the 13 layers of, actually 14, not 13, because the first one is without any marking. So we have 14 layers of dynamics on the kick, then about 10 or 11 in here, then the same, pretty much almost the same for the snares, and these high ends. So technically those are all different samples following the velocity that you're hitting. But even for those samples that are covering the whole velocity range, I have some modulations here. The EQ, gain, modulation, and attack modulation. So the softer you hit the key, the softer the attack, and the less high mids you're getting, and vice versa. So here is the instrument, here is the unit. Please use it, share, and have fun.